Hey guys, it's Sam and welcome back to VLOGMAS. Today I'm going to be doing my Q&A for being a social worker slash therapist. A few weeks ago I asked on Twitter and Instagram for questions that people had about my choice of career and just whatever really they wanted to ask me. I said, really ask me anything. So this is the answers to those questions. I'm just going to be going through not in any particular order on the questions, and there were a lot of like repeated themes and stuff, so I'll get into it. Just for a smidge of background, I've been a social worker for almost 10 years now, about like 8 or 9. I started out obviously at the bachelor's level, then went up and got my master's about almost 4 years ago. So right now in Illinois, I have my LSW, which is licensed social worker, and I'm about to get my LCSW, which is licensed clinical social worker, and that's the highest licensure that you can get. I've worked in a number of different fields of social work, foster care and adoption, but specifically the adoption side of things for a long time because that's what I started out in, which I might get into with some of the questions. It's one of the only career paths you can go into with a bachelor's. Then I got into medical, specifically oncology, and then inpatient hospice for about a year. I did some intensive family therapy work where it was like in-home family therapy. I did that for about like 4 months. That was with teenagers, families that were a step below psychiatric hospitalization. And then currently I'm an outpatient therapist. So seeing people in the community, all via like telehealth, which was my ideal job and what I went for the whole time when I went into social work and psychology. So seeing a range of outpatient concerns, mostly anxiety, some depression. Our practice specializes in OCD, and then trauma, medical specialty stuff, specializations like oncology, chronic illness, things like that are what I kind of specialize in, and grief. And yeah, just basically anything outpatient, relationship concerns, couples therapy, all of that. But anyway, let's get into it. That's my background. And I'm not going to be reading off people's usernames because like I said, a lot of these have similar themes. So I'm kind of answering the general question that a lot of people asked. Does your job ever trigger your anxiety? This ties into another question I'm going to answer later, but specifically my job actually does not. I really thought that it might, that I might have some concerns, and I haven't done this specific job as far as being a therapist in an anxiety flare. However, traditionally speaking, at work, I don't tend to have really bad anxiety when I'm working with clients directly. Like in my downtime in previous jobs, I would have a lot of anxiety. But if I'm doing like client work, patient work, one-on-one, I don't tend to have it because my brain is entirely focused on like their stuff. So this job especially, since most of my, 95 to 98% of my day is doing client work and like not other downtime at all. So this job really doesn't allow me to get very anxious or anything. And so far I haven't had any clients that have anything particularly triggering that would spark my anxiety, because my triggers are not quite like unusual, but they're not super common. And so a lot of my clients don't have those triggers, and then they just don't talk about things that would potentially trigger me. It has triggered sort of like my general anxiety, like as far as some sort of like conflict type things. Like I've had a couple of couples who have come in where there's been an abusive dynamic, and I have to tell them that I can't work with them with couples therapy because the whole point of couples therapy is to build attachment, and you don't want someone to attach to their abuser. And we specifically don't do that work. I would refer them out to somebody else. But in those situations, there's been a couple of like butting heads type scenarios with these abusive narcissists that don't like it when we tell them they're being abusive. So that is a little bit like, oh, but it's a temporary, like, I think anyone would be stressed by it, and isn't my anxiety flaring. I also, before I started this job, got on a proper medication regime for me and just did a lot of work over the last like year on my anxiety, and so I'm in a really good place with that. I have had other jobs that have triggered my anxiety and have had really bad flares in. My foster care and adoption job, towards the end of it, right before I actually got sick, I was having a really bad flare during that, again, because it was like a lot of downtime and pressure. I don't really know. It just wasn't really appreciated in that job. And then during my hospice job, I also was having a lot of anxiety because, well, you're seeing a ton of death. That's pretty gruesome in inpatient hospice, and I think my brain was like, I can't do this anymore. And that environment also wasn't like super supportive either. My coworkers were, but like upper management was not. And actually it's a hellscape right now. I have some friends that still work in hospice at the place I was, and during COVID, it's just like, even worse. So yeah, I would have been in a not good place if I would have stayed there. I did get a couple questions about what's your go-to therapeutic modality theory that you work with. I do pull from a few of them, but mainly the cognitive behavioral therapies. So CBT, although CBT is like not my favorite because CBT is so structured, and like traditional CBT is very like, I don't know, it plays into the current model, especially in the United States, of get things done as fast as possible, go, go, go. And they actually even teach you in CBT courses and like traditional ones to like interrupt people and like get them on track. And it's very like solution focused, which is fine if somebody is like, I can only do 8 sessions. I know in like certain other countries, like you only get approved for like a very small amount of sessions for mental health necessarily, and it's not necessarily like long term. So for that model, which I don't think is a great model, it works for that, very like solution focused. But again, usually the thing with that is that like, yes, it can kind of treat this like one symptom that you may have, but then there's a lot of other things that are playing into that. So that can be a little like, eh. So my favorite is ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy. It's a version, it's like it's in the same realm as like cognitive behavioral therapies, like all of those. But it sort of combines a number of different ones, and it works for like short-term solution focused type people, but also more like long-term therapies. And what I really like about it is the neutrality of it. Basically at its core, and this is like very, very boiled down, and I'm obviously still learning it. It's a more like complex modality, and you can do a lot of trainings in it, which I plan to do after I get my LCSW. But it boils down to everything being neutral, pretty much. And it's kind of like, is this action or thought or whatever workable or not workable? It's not good or bad. It's not positive, negative. We're not fighting with the thoughts or necessarily the actions. We're figuring out, is this workable for the life that you want to lead, or is it not? So there's some focus on like what you want out of life and like values, some of that deeper stuff. And then becoming more of the like observer of your thoughts, the knowing, which is true of all therapies, that you can't change your thoughts and your feelings. You validate them, you experience them, you observe them, and then you can change your actions. That's the only thing you really have control over. So I really like that concept, and it also is like has principles that I've applied to my own life, and I just really like that, you know, like that action can be workable or not. Like for example, if somebody has like depression or something and they're talking about, I don't want to watch as much TV. Okay, TV itself is not the problem. TV itself is neutral, because in other circumstances, TV could be fine. TV could be helpful. TV could be like learning or relaxing when used almost in like moderation or whatever. But in this instance, it's not workable because somebody is sitting in front of the TV for like 8 hours and like not doing anything, not activating any other kind of behaviors, and it's just like a way for them to dull their emotions. So TV is not the problem. It's, is it workable or not towards the life you want to lead? That's a very basic example, but that's something I really like because it really takes away a lot of the like morality of like thoughts and feelings and things. In most circumstances, there are some extremes where that would not be true, as far as like, you know, there's some morally good and bad things. But generally speaking, the whole thing with mental health is you kind of have to be like, there's so much gray area, and kind of taking a step back from it and being like, we're not going to sit here and judge our thoughts and feelings or even actions. We're just going to figure out if they're workable or not. Again, very boiled down version of it, but that's the one I really like to use a lot. I also, for couples and stuff, our particular practice uses EFT, which is emotion focused therapy, which I really like for couples. I only have a few couples that I see right now. Couples therapy is not my specialty by any means, but it has a really interesting cycle that really speaks to a lot of people. So I really like EFT, but also Gottman method. Gottman is one of the like leading relationship therapists, and their method of relationship and like couples therapy is very well known. So I really like Gottman method stuff too, but I haven't gotten very much into the couples therapy, EFT, and Gottman method stuff training wise myself because I don't see a lot of couples. Like, yes, you can apply that to individuals as well, but I don't see a ton of couples right now. So I'm doing more of the ACT stuff that can be applied everywhere instead of focusing all my energy on those like couples therapy methods. Would you ever take in patients that are subscribed to your YouTube? I can imagine having that context would have a weird dynamic in a therapy social work setting. I wouldn't willingly do that because that would be like sort of like an ethics violation. So social workers specifically, probably of almost all of the mental health ones, I mean, I don't know everyone's ethics, but social work ethics and like the fields, ethics are pretty strict, and for good reason, because the power dynamic and the bond there and the emotional information we have would make people potentially really vulnerable to like abuse and manipulation from people who like shouldn't be social workers. So like an ethics breach, you can completely lose your license. So with my clients, it's like, I can't be friends with you on social media. Like I tell everyone that. The adults don't tend to care. The kids are like, oh, okay, you know. We even have something where it's like, if I see you in public, I will not say hi first because you, like, I don't want to expose you to whoever you're with or whatever, and you can also make up a lie about who I am if you want to say hi to me. I'm happy to say hi to you, but I will not say hi to you first. So yeah, so having some of this like parasocial relationship wouldn't be appropriate for me being someone's therapist. I am completely okay doing like consult life coach work with people, which I kind of am thinking about doing as like a side thing. I've done it before with some of my Patreon supporters with like unhauls, like specifically around books and unhauling. So I bring like a mental health aspect and some of those skills to it, but as like almost like a life coach organizer. Like, I am not your therapist, I am not your social worker, because that would not be appropriate. And it's for like a short term, you know, one session type thing. That again, that's what I've done before with Patreon supporters. But yeah, someone having a bunch of information about me and me personally would not be appropriate for the therapeutic relationship. It would cause a lot of like transference and like countertransference, which is basically like somebody putting their emotions about like other relationships onto you as a therapist. That's a very, very basic definition. That is probably not that good. But there would be like way too many issues. Again, they would know too much, because we're not friends. Like, your therapist is not your friend. You can be like friendly with them, but they're not, you know, your actual friend. So that would be a boundary that wouldn't be appropriate. I mean, even as far as ethics go for therapists, you're never allowed to have relationships with any of your clients, current or former, ever. Like, if you do therapy ever with them, you're not allowed to have any kind of relationship, friendship, anything like that. And you can't even like knowingly date like a family member that might potentially cause them distress. So if you meet on accident, like someone's brother or sister or something, and start dating them, and then you find out, oh my god, that's my client's sibling, like, you have to break up, because that could potentially, again, cause issues. You'd have too much information about things that you shouldn't, and vice versa, and any kind of thing like that could potentially cause some distress. So in smaller settings, like, this is sort of an issue that people have to walk, like if they're in smaller towns or smaller states or just communities that are more like insular, there's some like, oh, how do we do this kind of treading that has to go on there. So yeah, that was a very long-winded answer to like, no, I probably couldn't do that. How do you deal with patients who are more emotionally unstable? So in my current job, I don't have that a ton, because I am seeing specifically populations that want to be in therapy, like no one is forced to be, where in other situations I've had people that are like mandated to be in some kind of like therapeutic setting or see a social worker, but in this case they're not, and they're like coming with the point of like doing therapy. So I don't see it a ton. I have had suicidal clients, I have had clients that like self-harm and stuff, but most of it is very managed at that point. I'm not seeing people in crisis. It happens, but I don't see a ton of people in crisis. I also don't work specifically with personality disorders myself. This is not saying that personality disorders are like, those people are awful. No, it's just not my specialty. And a lot of personality disorders tend to have more unstable mood patterns. It's just not something that I work with. I have obviously worked with people with different, more unstable emotional patterns and personalities and things when in other career paths. So like the foster care and adoption, I would have some of that, because obviously you're dealing with a lot of trauma. With the kids and families that were psychiatric hospitalization, like a step below, a lot of that. And that's when I found out really quickly with that, like, I can't really do effective work with people, one, that are mandated to be doing it. Like, when someone's forced to do therapy, it's not a population that I do very well with, because I'm like, yeah, well, it's really hard to build a therapeutic bond with someone forced to be there, you know, especially forced to be there by like a system or just the state or whatever, like, ugh. So that's really hard, and just not something that I love doing, because I enjoy this profession so much for being able to help. And when there's so many blocks up for building that therapeutic bond and building that rapport and all of that, it's very hard to be able to help. So I start feeling really burnt out and unfulfilled, and like it's just not my specialty. There's some people who like love the challenge of that, and the few breakthroughs they have like get them through the year. I don't need constant breakthroughs, but I need like a little bit. Like once a month I need a breakthrough with somebody, you know, and that's just a lot harder in other populations. But yeah, some really unstable people, like the people that I mentioned, like the narcissistic abusers, I hate working with that kind of population. That is not, again, my specialty. And that level of manipulation and abuse and trauma that those people are causing, like knowingly, can't. So I'm really firm with boundaries with people who are like more erratic. Again, not like with people who are being like non-maliciously erratic or having some kind of like episode. That's different. But with people who I would work with before that were coming into settings and trying to be like really manipulative and pushy, or in my current role, being like really shitty, it's very firm, like, you will not speak to me that way. That is not appropriate. I'm not going to be a bitch to you, but here's what's not okay, because we as social workers and therapists are kind of like trying to help, not train people, but for lack of a better word, like teach and train people how to have normal social interactions and can communicate and have boundaries. So we have to set a precedent for people. So sometimes we're some of the first people that are like, no, that's not okay. And people are like, what do you mean? It's like, well, yeah, like I understand the context of why you might be acting that way because of your own trauma, because of your own mental health issues, whatever. But what I tell people a lot, either about themselves or about people that they're relating to and talking about in therapy, is like someone else's issues creates a context for why they're doing what they're doing. It doesn't create an excuse. So there can be workarounds made for that if someone's willing to try, and it, again, can provide some context so that you can have some compassion and some empathy for that situation, but it doesn't excuse poor behavior, abusive behavior, manipulative, all of that. So yeah, another long-winded response. We're gonna get a lot of those today. This is a good lead-on question from that. How do you maintain healthy boundaries and prevent your clients/patients' problems from affecting you too much emotionally? I mean, boundaries are so important as far as like, I feel like boundaries are more about your like work setting, and also just being clear in your communication to the people that you're working with. Like, here's the times that I'm available, and not answering the phone under non-emergent situations. There are emergency lines for people to call, you know, if there are emergencies. And other jobs when there's been more like crisis type clients, like they have another like on-call number to call, like they don't call me. And my clients right now like don't really have those kinds of crises where they would call me. So I don't really have an issue with that. Again, not just dropping everything and being at someone's beck and call, but again, because I'm not working with crisis populations, it's not a situation where I'm putting someone in danger, you know, if I weren't to answer a phone call or I weren't to do something right away. Like, there are certain work times. And that's true for my, like, supervisors as well. It's like, I'm not checking my phone all the time and being, like, really enmeshed in their stuff. But obviously we're human, and I do think about clients or patients, depending on the field I was working in, between sessions, especially ones that are like really in crisis, really high emotions, things like that, like especially in hospice and stuff. I was bringing it home all the time. It was very hard to not bring that home. I don't do it so much in my current role, but I would say that there's always like one client a week that kind of like rotates that I'm like thinking about, because their particular thing that they brought into session that week is more like something I'm mulling over. But I try not to, and I don't frequently think about clients in my downtime, and that's just something that I've learned over time. I think all the fields that I've worked in have sort of like made me have those emotional boundaries. Do I still care? Do I still have empathy? Absolutely. Like, you have to for this job, otherwise you just become completely burnout and like not a compassionate person anymore. But there's a certain level of like, I can only do so much. I can't work harder than my clients are on their problems. And like, this is, you know, their life continues to spin without me, you know, and you can't like save the world. So it's that kind of stuff. And then just making sure that I take time for my own downtime, like I said, having those boundaries in place and just being very upfront about that. Like, this is something we talk about in first sessions. This is something I used to talk about with clients when I was doing it more in like a social work setting. I'd be like, here's when I'm available, here's when I'm not. It's a lot about like access to you with boundaries, and the emotional access to you. Again, when I had people that were more emotionally abusive, emotionally manipulative personalities, it was like, hey, this is not okay. If you continue to do this, here's how I'm going to respond. Not in a threatening way, but in like a, you have to meet me here. I'm not going to meet you down here. You know, at like this energy. I'm not doing that. Like, here's where you have to come to have access to me. And again, that's something that we try to help our clients do as well, to have more healthy communication and boundaries and emotional stability. Here's some stuff about schooling. Was schooling worth it, not just money-wise, but also the studying? So there's a couple questions about school. So for social work, like, you have to get like a master's to get any kind of like not upper, like, I mean, because it's not like we're paid a lot of money, but to get any kind of job that's like a little bit more complex, you like have to have a master's degree. Like what some of the only things you can do with a bachelor's with social work and psychology are like mental health, are like drug and alcohol, like substance abuse centers, and foster care and adoption. Like those are like the only two that you can kind of really do with a bachelor's. Everything else, any kind of management role in those fields, and then anything else like medical, higher mental health, outpatient, inpatient mental health, any of that, you have to have a master's degree or above to do anything. So in that case, yes, it's worth it. Did I learn a lot in my master's? Yes and no. Like there's some things I tell people in master's programs for social work specifically, like don't do all the readings. Like there's some readings that are just like so pointless that you're never going to remember. I more just did the readings for my like papers and my assignments, and I'm not doing extra reading because you're going to forget it. And I would only do readings that were pertinent to what I wanted to go into. So especially with my master's degree, I kind of did all my papers and all my research and everything related to either LGBTQ plus populations or cancer patients, because those are the populations I was going to work with a lot. So I tailored everything to that, and if the readings didn't have much to do with that or something general that was going to be helpful, like trauma or whatever, I'm not reading every single thing. And I didn't suffer for that. I mean, I got straight A's in my master's program, and like, yeah, it was fine. So yes, school teaches you a lot more as far as like a master's program for social work. It teaches you a lot more about like societal systems and structures, you know, how racism, sexism, homophobia, how all of that affects people, more so than it gives you any training on therapy techniques. Like that's stuff that you all get after and in your supervision. And because with social workers, as far as getting licensed, you have to have 2 to 3, sometimes I think in some states 4 years of supervision where you meet an hour a week with somebody with that license already and you go over like cases and stuff. And that's when you are getting like trainings and things like that. And you keep getting trainings after you're licensed. You have to get a certain amount of trainings every 2 years in order to continue to hold your license. Are your loans paid off was another question. No. My loans will like never be paid off. I have, between my bachelor's and my master's, I think I have like $109,000 in student loans. Someone asked how much my master's was, and I think it was like 60 or 70,000, and that's like pretty standard. And then I had loans left over from obviously bachelor's, so hopefully some of those will get like forgiven at some point. But like I'm not pursuing student loan forgiveness because I'm no longer working for nonprofits. That's another thing that a lot of social workers and people in like these kinds of like helping professions have to do. You kind of have to decide, okay, do I go for student loan forgiveness that will hopefully stick around and work for nonprofits and make very, very, very little money? Or do I still make like just very little money or like little money and have to pay off my student loans at like a higher rate and not get the forgiveness from like the nonprofit student loan forgiveness? Yeah, so I'm just basically doing like income-based repayment forever because I have looked into like refinancing my loans, and I've done all the things, like trust me, to try to see if I could get them paid off faster and get rid of some of this interest and all that. It's just not possible for me at my income to do that. So yeah, it's shitty and it sucks, but yeah, my student loans will be like never paid off. And I went to in-state schools and everything too. So it's not like I went to like Ivy Leagues. I did not do any of that. I went to state schools. I went to Northern Illinois University for my undergrad, and I went to Boston University for my MSW, and got a lot of money to pay because loans are predatory. I do have some questions about like being a client. So how do you get the most out of therapy as a client? That's a great question, and I wish that like almost everyone could ask. Also, Tally might bark right now because someone's walking by. So getting the most out of therapy as a client, a couple of just like basic things. Kind of know what you're going to therapy for and be as honest as possible. Like obviously you guys have to build a rapport and all of that, but like your therapist can't help you if you don't tell them. And please, for the love of God, do not like just wait for your therapist to ask you questions, because we're not always going to know what you need and what to ask. So usually I lead my sessions with like, how was your week? You know, to kind of get people going. And sometimes they'll just be like, good. I'm like, you gotta give me something. So kind of going into session knowing what you want to talk about, like, you know, if you have a bad memory, like writing stuff down from your week so that you know, like if something happens that's distressing to you, like write that down so you know what to work on, whether it's about your relationship, about your communication, about, you know, something traumatic that happened to you, how your anxiety or depression symptoms are doing, like whatever. And even if you're going in for something like anxiety, depression, and that's been going fairly well, that's not the only thing you have to stick to in therapy. You know, like if you are like fighting with your spouse or something, or like annoyed with them or whatever, talk about that. Like even if you came in initially for one thing, like your therapist isn't going to be like, oh no, you can't talk about that. Like anything that's bothering you, you can talk about. So it's just good to have in mind what you want to talk about and like what your goals are. And the other big thing is to like do and try the things that your therapist suggests, especially if you're doing more of like a behavioral therapy. Most therapists are going to give you like things to try between sessions, like things to just try out, and there's no failing it. It's just like trying it out, seeing if it works, and coming back with feedback. So doing some of those things and seeing how they work between sessions, because most of therapy is not the stuff that happens in the room in the session, it's what you're doing during your life between sessions. So doing some of those things is where you're going to find the most growth. So it's important to do the work outside of sessions. Like that's where you're going to get the most benefit from sessions. Also with that comes with, you know, letting your therapist know if they've done something that has offended you, or if a certain style isn't working. Like just being really upfront about like, hey, you know, this is a partnership. Like this is your team. So letting the other person know if like something isn't going well for you, you know, not just like sitting back and being like, oh, therapy isn't going to work for me, because most therapists can take it in other directions if the way that they're going isn't working for you. So doing that, being honest, coming in with information, kind of knowing what you want to get out of therapy, and doing the work between sessions. As someone who deals with very difficult issues on the daily, how do you refill your own cup or prevent burnout? I had a number of questions about this, people that were going into the field that were really worried about burnout, things like that. Again, boundaries is like the biggest thing. Like you have to protect your own boundaries, because setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm is not going to work. Like you are going to be emotionally exhausted. Like there are some times that yes, you can do that for a short period of time, but you're going to be super ineffective as a social worker, as a therapist, as a mental health professional of any kind if you are running on empty. You lose a bunch of your empathy, you lose some of your compassion. Like when I was really burnt out in hospice, I was getting to the point where I was like, I cannot talk to people about some of these things as far as like, you know, taking their loved one home or whatever, because I was just like, I'm so sick of hearing the same thing over and over, because I was so burnt out, because there were no boundaries there. You'll notice that as far as my booktube channel, I was barely reading because I was like so burnt out and exhausted. Tally had to get kicked out because she's throwing a whole conniption about there being turkeys outside. So yeah, when I'm burnt out, I do a lot of just like emotional spacing. I get really irritable. I have trouble sleeping. My anxiety goes up, all this stuff. Like you can't be an effective helper in a helping profession if you're burnt out like that. And it's really easy for that to happen because again, a lot of places are not very supportive as far as supervisors and stuff, and the way that the systems are set up. A lot of the systems are like basically made to fail. Like social workers and mental health professionals are not appreciated and treated very well, with like money and support and, you know, benefits and things like that, time off, all these kinds of things. So it's really hard, but taking the time off, even if your job makes it super difficult, taking the time off that you need because you're entitled to it. It's something that you're entitled to have. Really using your downtime as effectively as possible, not in a productivity type way, but in a like, what are my needs right now? Do I need this kind of like self-care, relaxation, sleeping in? Like I give myself a lot of space to sleep in on my days off, which can mess with my sleep schedule a little bit, but ultimately like I'm sometimes really exhausted, like emotionally I need the sleep. You know, tuning into like what are my needs, you know, as far as what kind of media is going to be really helpful right now, and making sure that you're not doing it to like dissociate and like zone out and disconnect completely, doing it in a very connected, thoughtful way. Having different kinds of like self-care practices that are helpful. I know we say self-care and everyone's like, huh, but like self-care can be anything. It can be reading, it can be sleeping in it can be eating certain foods, not necessarily healthy ones, like whatever you need. Like, do you need some like ice cream, or do you need to be really focusing on like highly nutritional things, like making sure you drink a lot of water, all these things that everyone knows, getting some movement, getting out in nature and grounding. Those are something that I do like pretty often. If I have a really heavy session, particularly when it's nice weather out, I will go outside and stand barefoot in the grass to like pour my energy back into like the earth, like to get more grounded. It's proven to work. So those kinds of things are big, you know, making sure that I'm not really staying isolated and secluded and seeing other people when that's appropriate. Obviously right now during COVID, that's not appropriate and that's a lot harder. But right now, my friends and I are playing Among Us every Saturday, and that's like my social interaction. So doing those kinds of things and making sure you're still doing what you love, the second you start seeing yourself not doing the things that you know you love just because of exhaustion, that's almost when you have to lean into those things you love more, because it's going to fill your cup up more. And also just finding a job that you really love. Like right now, I don't get super burnt out in my job. At some point I will probably get burnt out. I'll have to take some steps back, but my current job is very supportive, which is like the first time I've ever had such a supportive environment to be working in. I'm really in control of my schedule. The boundaries are in place. I'm working with populations that I'm very comfortable with, and I find the work really, really fulfilling. If you're not finding your work fulfilling, you're gonna burn out way faster. Like that is just the nature of the game. And especially when you're first in it and you're like your bachelor's, if you're not in a field that you want to be in, like if you don't want to stay in child welfare or like drug and alcohol, you're going to have a higher rate of burnout. That's why it's like you have to kind of like push to get the higher degrees to get into what you want to get into, because you're going to feel more like just competent and better when you're not dealing with all of that. Yeah, the filling your own cup stuff is obviously very individual, but it's the same stuff that everyone says about filling your cup up. You know, activity, outside time, social time, like making sure you're getting your needs met and being really in tune with yourself is very important for this field. Sometimes people must say stuff that destabilize you. How do you keep a straight face? I tell people, like, when they first start therapy with me, that since I've been doing this for so long, as far as like working with all these populations, I'm like, listen, I used to work with teens that were a step below psychiatric hospitalization. I've heard everything. And that's not to belittle those teens. It's just to say, like, there's nothing you can really say to me at this point that's going to throw me off. Like the things that I've seen, heard, experienced in my like almost 10 years of doing this, there's very little that throws me off at this point. I will say I have had clients say things about like relationships. Like I've had clients that have like had affairs and like told me, and it's more me being like, you know, kind of separating your therapist brain from like your normal brain, and like because your normal brain is like, ooh, that's some juicy gossip, which obviously I would never share. Like it's not gossip in that way, but it's like if a friend was telling you this, you'd be like like captivated, where as a therapist you're like very neutral. And I found like very early on when I got into therapy specifically, I'm like, I'm really good at embracing the gray areas of life. I am very like non-judgmental. Like I'm pretty judgmental as like a person normally, but as a therapist and as a social worker, I'm not. So it's funny because I can be more judgmental in my like personal life. I just can. And with like the standards I hold other people to, but with my clients, I'm so like, no, like I have a ton of empathy. Like this is, I mean, it sounds like I'm bragging, but like, this is kind of what you have to have for this field. Like I remove a lot of the negative connotations from a lot of behaviors. And it's like, listen, I am in your corner, like as your therapist. I will call you out when need be. But I'm in your corner, I understand where you're coming from, I understand the background, and we're gonna work together on getting through whatever it is. But there's not a lot that really throws me off. My clients are all like pretty funny people. I have a number of clients that are like so funny and fun to work with and say like really funny things. Like one of my most, I would say, traumatized clients is a teen that we like talk in like TikTok memes half the time about like stuff so that it's less like, ugh, you know? But yeah, I mean, starting out in foster care and adoption, I saw so much trauma and abuse there and like crazy off the wall things there. And then working in medical, working in hospitals, working in hospice with people dying, you just see so much that at this point I'm like, nothing really phases me. And it's funny because in my like personal life now, I can talk about some like really off the wall things like over dinner, and people are like, you know, I don't share client information, but like, you know, situations that happened like years ago, I'll be like, oh yeah, I saw this, like whatever. And they're like, and I'm like, oh, that's not normal. It's just, so yeah, I'm pretty good about keeping a straight face. If something does throw me off, I will just be like, wow, you know, and like kind of lean into that with them, and they're like, yeah, fucked up, right? And I'm like, yeah, you know, like, so yeah, I don't tend to have a big problem with that. I'm pretty good about keeping a very like neutral face because I do feel pretty neutrally about most things. Another question about being a client: how long should you stick with a therapist before you know if they're your vibe or not? We recommend like 3 sessions. By 3 sessions, you kind of start to know if there's like a rapport there, if the personalities mesh. You should like get a pretty good idea after like 1, but 3 sessions gives you an idea of like what their style is like, you know, making sure that you or they weren't having an off day, especially if you're new to therapy. Like don't quit after 1 session. Like just don't. You're not doing yourself any favors by doing that, unless they're doing something that's completely awful, like they're spewing some stuff that is like horrible, which hopefully a therapist wouldn't do, but there's people out there that are like that, or whatever, like that's different. If you get a vibe where you're just like, I hate this, that's different. But like if you're just like, oh, I'm uncomfortable, I don't know, it's like, well, yeah, therapy can be a little uncomfortable. You don't know this person and you're supposed to like share your deepest, darkest secrets. Like we get that, but there's going to be some rapport building, and after about 3 sessions, that's when you're going to know like what the goals are, what the like treatment methods are, kind of what you're going to do, you know, in sessions and stuff. So I say about 3. And you should know. And again, there's no problem in shopping around for a therapist. I tell people too, I was like, by 3 sessions, we'll know if we're a good fit. I could also tell you that I'm not a good fit for you and refer you to someone else. You know, you can tell me the same thing. I'm not going to be offended. Go to a couple different therapists if your insurance will let you, if you have the ability to pay for it, and kind of see like, who's a good fit for me, you know? Don't shop around too much, you know, like maybe see 2 or 3, but like, you know, find someone that is a good fit for you, because you're gonna get the most out of therapy with the person that is a good fit for you. So don't be afraid to find a new therapist if your therapist isn't working for you, but also don't move on too quickly, especially if you're new to therapy. What or who inspired you to become a therapist? No person specifically, but I just always wanted to do it. When I first went to my undergrad program, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I originally was going to go into pre-veterinary, and then I was like, oh my god, this science, there's no way. So I kind of just ended up doing like a undecided, and then quickly went into psych. And it's because I took a sociology course, loved it, and realized like, oh, you really like how humans work, and like how social dynamics work, and like how the systems of humans work, and all of that. Like anthropology, social classes, psych classes, social work classes were all like great for me. So that's kind of why I wanted to do that. And then also just kind of realizing right before college started and like into college, I had a very traumatic relationship. I have forgiven this person and I understand why it happened, but I was dating a man who was far older than me and was a drug addict, and I didn't know at the time, and then I finally found out, and we were together for a while, and it was a very just like formative experience. So I kind of wanted to originally go into drug and alcohol, and then I realized like, no, that is not the population I like working with. But helping people that are going through these like traumatic things was something I was like, I could be really good at this. And then, yeah, every field that I've gone into in social work, like I've been good at. They haven't all been my favorite, but I've been, like I said, I have that neutrality and that empathy and that compassion that not everyone has, and that's why not everyone goes into helping professions, and that's totally fine. But I have always really liked it. I like engaging with people, I like helping people, and I like being that like third-party neutral perspective that I feel like so many people need, because a lot of us get our advice and stuff from people who are too enmeshed in our issues, and you need that like third-party perspective, and I really like being that. Like there's very few things that I don't like about my current job, especially like the things about social work career stuff when you're in like bureaucratic environments. The structures and the systems are what suck. The people for me are not whatever sucks, you know. Even when I'm dealing with a really hard case or a hard like personality type, it's still not them. It's usually the system that I'm just like so frustrated by. The lack of support, the lack of financial support, emotional support, time off, you know, anything like that. The people making rules higher up in agencies that don't even know how you do your job. Like they've never been social workers and they're giving you things to do that you're like, this is pointless, and you don't even know what you're talking about. Those things are what suck, but never the people. Would you recommend going for your MSW directly after finishing your BSW, or would you wait at least a year? I know I said like, hurry up and get onto your degree or whatever, but I would wait for an MSW program specifically. I would wait like about a year. The MSW programs are like tailored for people who have field experience. So they make you like write papers and do assignments and do discussion questions based on your like field experience, because they assume that you're coming back right like after some time working as like a BSW, and that's not always correct. But the people that were BSWs that had just come out of school, like, we're dealing with their MSW so different. We're getting like so much more burned out by it. We're getting so flustered by it because they didn't have the real life experience. They didn't know what to write about. They didn't have cases to like provide context about. It was much harder, and sometimes the teachers had to be like, here's a fake case for you to write on, and you're just not as invested. So kind of figuring out what area you want to go into by doing some stuff BSW wise for a while is going to be helpful. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily go right from BSW to MSW. People have done it, they've done it successfully, they've been fine, but I do think from what I've heard from other colleagues that it is just harder because you don't have that real world experience that the MSWs assume that you're going to have. If a client you already had comes to you with a problem that is out of your area of expertise, do you refer them to someone else or try helping them with it? It kind of depends on what it is. If I'm already seeing the client and it's not necessarily like their main thing, then usually I'll try to help them with it. But there's a few like exceptions to this, or I'll help them for a little while, and then when we get as far as we're gonna get, then I'm like, okay, we have to kind of go elsewhere with this. One instance I'm thinking of is people who have been abused by their partners and have been in like really long-term narcissistic abusive relationships. Typically speaking, I will work with them for a while, build rapport, get them like confident in the therapy process, help them with some other stuff, and then be like, you have to go to some kind of like survivorship specific like therapist or group or something, because I just don't have the resources that are so specialized to that I could help you with that. Someone whose primary focus is like drug and alcohol addiction, I don't usually take on those clients. I have clients who have some like drug and alcohol misuse that we will like cover that, but it's like not their main focus in their life. If someone is like directly coming out of rehab or something, I'm like, I can't. Like, that is just not my specialty. Like, you need somebody more focused on that. But other things, like, I'm very trauma trained, so a lot of the trauma stuff, like, I can really deal with. I really like working with people with like religious trauma. So like religious trauma, you know, like I have the experience with, like, the child abuse, any kind of mental abuse, any of that. Cutting, dissociation, suicidality. If someone's severely suicidal, then we refer out typically, but we don't tend to have a lot of those clients. They're already usually in a higher level of care than us anyway. I don't tend to do really like extreme eating disorders. Like if somebody were like that I was seeing were to reveal that they've had this like really severe anorexia bulimia, I can do disordered eating. Eating disorders that are full blown, that again requires more of like a specialty. But typically speaking, especially if a client still wants to keep working with me, I'll do the research myself. And like especially if it's not like their main thing, if it's like one of many things kind of going on and they're all kind of bleeding into each other and there's like a core thing that is affecting all of them, then I'll keep working with them. But it's really like a case-by-case basis thing. But I will very much stay in my lane. Like if something is very out of my expertise, I'm like, I'm not gonna like pretend that I know what I'm doing here, you know. But with a lot of things, I have the experience in it, number one, or number two, it's very easy for me to add it on to what I'm already doing. What was your educational track, majors and concentrations? So for my bachelor's degree, I got a bachelor's in I think I got a BA, yeah, a bachelor's in arts in psychology. I double majored, and then I got a social work BS social work. So I double majored in psych and social work because there were so many crossover classes that I was like, might as well double major. And then I got my master's in social work. And I think, did they make us do like a concentration or specialization? I think it might have been like individual or whatever, but I'm not even sure they really did that because my program combined macro and micro level social work. So that is what I did for my educational track. What do you say to someone who is nervous about starting therapy? Why do you think patients and therapists click and some don't? And how long does it take to click? And then what is your favorite thing about being a therapist? If someone is nervous about starting therapy, I'm kind of like, you just gotta do it. I think therapy is so helpful, but yeah, you have to find the person that you click with. And as far as like what makes people click or not click, it's just like personality styles. It's just like your personality. Like yes, we're not your friends, but you still have to like be sort of friendly, and you just have to have personalities that click, and not every single one is going to, and that's totally fine. Like I mentioned before, I like to give about 3 sessions to see if everything's going to kind of work, but definitely find someone that you feel like is, you know, is going to work for you, that has a style that you really like and appreciate. Have them explain their style to you. Like I said, shop around for therapists. I have someone that loves therapy so much and I've been in it for like myself so long that I'm like, I love therapy. Like I can't imagine my life without therapy, both being a therapist and having one. Like it's so helpful to have that third party perspective. And generally, like, therapists are not going to judge you. If you have a therapist that you feel judged by, that's not a good therapist, and they fucking suck, and they shouldn't be doing what they're doing because they're doing more harm than good. But like, I know that people have really horrible experiences with therapists, but I know plenty of people who have great experiences with therapists. So I think just, again, finding one that's right for you, tap in and see why you're nervous. Is it fear of being judged? Is it fear of it not working? Because for me, I'm like, well, like, what's the harm? Like, what's going on in your life for some reason isn't working. That's why you want to seek therapy. So might as well try it. And there's a bunch of different styles of therapy. So if one style of therapy doesn't work for you, don't brush off therapy as like, it's never going to work. Like, find someone who does another kind of therapy, you know, like look into some therapies and stuff. There's plenty of YouTube channels that talk about different kinds of therapy. Like, see which one might be a good fit for you. Yeah, like I think it's great. I thought it was great before I even went into the field. So yeah, I can't really imagine what my life would be like right now without having therapy experience as a client. I am a much more self-aware and like honestly like more of an evolved person for being in therapy. Like I would be very different if I wasn't in therapy myself. And then what's your favorite thing about being a therapist? like I've mentioned, just helping people. I know that's like such a trite, like, well, yeah, kind of like answer, but I just really like being able to make those like small changes with people that have a really big impact. Like there's so many things about therapy that like it's not rocket science. Like we aren't like creating like a magic wand to wave at you and fix your problems. Like you're doing the work, but like seeing people do the work, like I have some clients that like I get out of sessions with them and I just want to cry with like joy for them because they're doing so well and they like say they're doing so well. And whenever clients are like, oh my God, you helped me so much, I'm like, I've pointed you in the right direction, but like you walked, like you did it, you ran, you climbed the obstacles. Like I just kind of was there to like guide you a bit, but like you did the work. And I think seeing people like really change and better their lives is like so fulfilling. Like I'm getting chills and like a little like I don't know if you can tell, like my eyes are welling up thinking about it because it is so wonderful to see people grow, you know? And to see like the positive impact that you have, but then the positive impact that they have. Like we as mental health professionals, when we're doing our job well, have such a ripple effect like into other people's lives that like we don't even necessarily see. Like I affect my clients' families by helping my client to live the life they want to live and to like be better, hopefully, you know? So that's really cool. And again, I just like really seeing my clients succeed and like do better and like feel better and like live the life that they want to live. Like that is sort of me giving back for the positive therapy experiences that I've had. Is just like I want to be there for people through their like hard times, their hardest times, you know, in a way that sometimes family and friends can't be. I love my job. I love being a therapist. I love my job. How much of yourself do you bring into your work? I'm thinking this is sort of like a self-disclosure question, and this is like, how much do you necessarily talk about yourself? I will use my own experiences when appropriate. I use myself a lot more with my teen clients because I find that helps them open up a bit. So I will share stuff about like, here's some of my hobbies that I like, here's some of the things that I did this week, you know, vaguely. I don't really talk about myself too much, but in a way to build rapport. If I find that a client is really struggling, especially with my anxiety clients, which I have a lot of them, if someone is really feeling like they're a shitty person and they're weak and whatever, I will reveal, I'll be like, I have really bad anxiety. I've been through this and this. And usually they're like, oh my God, but you're like a therapist. I'm like, yeah, like a lot of people have this. Like it sucks, you know, like I hear you. And so using the self-disclosure in that way, never to make myself feel better. Therapists should never use self-disclosure for themselves. It should always be if they feel it's going to help the other person, if they feel that it's pertinent for that. So rapport building or revealing something about themselves that will make the other person like have a new perspective on things helps. So I feel like, again, disclosing about some of my own struggles very briefly, again, you don't want to be going into a ton of detail. That's helpful for people because a lot of people don't understand that, yes, we can be like empathetic even when we haven't experienced that thing, but a lot of people can feel better when they understand like, oh, you know what this is like, you know, if I have that experience. So yeah, I use a lot of that. I use that also for like normalization and stuff about like, yeah, like I feel the same way, you know, but again, it's more like vague. Like I'm not going into a ton of detail about like, here's step by step my own trauma and experience. No, but it'll be like, I've gone through something similar and, you know, look, you don't think that I'm a horrible person. And then they're like, oh, wow, yeah. So that's how I use myself. Do you battle with feeling not enough for some reason? These are some questions from another person who's a social worker. The imposter syndrome is like so real. You wouldn't think that from how I've been saying like I'm a good social worker and I'm a pretty good therapist. But yeah, there are plenty of times when I'm like, am I qualified to be doing this? Like I have my own mess. Like, do I have enough experience? Do I have enough knowledge? Like whatever. And so I'll have good weeks and bad weeks where some weeks I feel like, man, I didn't do anything. And some weeks I'm like, wow, I feel like really good. And I think something to remember and something that I use again with clients a lot is like, we both have our own mountains. Like I have my own mountain as a therapist and you have your own mountain. We're both climbing it. And the difference is that I can just see your mountain. I can tell you where the next foothold is because I can see it from a distance. I can't do that with my own mountain. That's why I have my own therapist who's looking at my mountain from their mountain, you know? So it's just good to kind of keep that in mind. But yeah, there are times when like, and that's the times that I burned out the most, when I'm feeling so ineffective because it's like, I just can't do this. I can't make any progress with people. Like it sucks. So yeah, there are definitely times like imposter syndrome with mental health and helping professions. So real. Do you ever feel like you don't know what to say when faced with hard topics? Sometimes yeah, but my default is just like, that sucks. You know, and people are like, that's so simple, and it is, but I use that so much in oncology and hospice specifically that now I do it a lot in sessions here. like sometimes people just want to hear like, that sucks. Like that is so shitty. This is so not fair, you know? Because a lot of times we as humans jump right into wanting to help, especially friends and family. They want to give solutions. Sometimes someone just needs, they don't even know they need it, to just hear like, I am here sitting with you in your pain and this sucks. And it's okay that it sucks. And it's going to be okay that it sucks, and it's going to probably suck for a while, you know, but we're going to be here. We're going to walk through it, you know? So that's kind of what I do with hard topics, with trauma, with grief, with whatever, loss, whatever. Just, I hear you, this sucks. I can't imagine what you're going through, you know? Especially if I don't feel like I have anything that, like, if I can't fix it, because a lot of things we can't fix, you know? So if I really feel like I don't have any guidance there, it's just like, it's just sitting in it, being like, okay, what's coming up for you? How can we make you feel more safe with this feeling? Because there's nothing we can do to change this. So let's sit with this feeling and be comfortable with this feeling and observe the thoughts that are coming up and not let the thoughts drag us in directions we don't want to go as far as behaviors, you know? But like validating and empathizing with the thoughts and the feelings is kind of the biggest thing that we do as therapists. And then the last question, which I've already talked about a bit, it has to do with boundaries and stuff, but how do you leave other people's pain and trauma at work and not carry it around with you? Like I said, boundaries and self-care are so important, but like we're going to. And I think that any therapist is just like, oh, I'm able to completely turn it off. Like, no, you're not. Or you're like, there's something going on with you, you know? Yeah, we think about our clients. We think about that stuff. And I think that's important for us to process and for us to see what's coming up. What is that? I think being a therapist and being a social worker, being a mental health professional, someone in a helping profession, you have to be self-aware and introspective and figure out what that's bringing up for you and work on yourself with what's happening with whatever client. I think we have a tremendous room for growth ourselves and to not just focus on other people's growth, but also our own, and how like this work can make us better people as well. Because it's important to be like, okay, why is this specific thing bothering me? What is this bringing up for me? What other education do I feel like I need? If there's no other education, then like what emotional stuff is coming up for me? You know, like doing therapy with yourself and also seeing your own therapist. Like all helping professions should be in therapy. Point blank. So yeah, like it's a lot of that, but it's also kind of being okay and accepting with yourself, like you're going to bring it home. Like there's some things that we see that like we're never going to forget. There are some horribly traumatic things that I've seen that I will never ever forget. That flash, you know, in my brain before I'm falling asleep multiple times a month, you know, or a week, depending on the week that I'm having, you know? So it's gonna happen. But, you know, having those safeguards in place, knowing what you need, knowing what your needs are, knowing where your boundaries are, knowing what, what your emotional needs are, that's what's really important and a big part of the work. So that is it for my Q&A, social work and therapist Q&A. So comment down below and let me know if you have any other questions or if there's anything you want me to elaborate on. I'm happy to do more of these in the future. I hope you learned something, and I hope that you're open to therapy if you weren't previously, or just, you know, that you feel slightly better about the mental health profession or have any guidance if you're going into it yourself. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye.